friends, just a few words to introduce to you Mr. Sharif Graham, who really doesn't need an introduction to most of us probably. He is going to give us a lecture on belief and faith. And those of you who don't know this, I have to tell that he is in a very special way, or double, or even more ways, qualified to do this. In the first place, he is an experienced speaker who many years has been teaching in a university in America on comparative religion. So he has a very good preparation to study Sufism further. Then, of course, he's long ago initiated in the Sufi order. And now he is doing, I think, wonderful work. Perhaps most attractive work you could do as a Sufi is at the Nekbach Stichting, working to edit, I don't know whether the word is correct, to bring together the authentic texts of Murshid's lectures so that they can be published in what we call the brown books, the complete works of Hazrat Inad Khan, which aim to publish the authentic text completely without changes and with notes indicating that there were different versions of the transcript. So I don't know whether I should talk about edit perhaps, but anyway it has to be brought together and presented and so on. And so he is completely lifelong immersing himself in the wonderful words of our Master. And he has consented to let us share a little bit in that inspiring stream of the teachings today. So we are very grateful. I'm happy to call you to give your lecture.
Thank you. Beloved ones of God, I open with the words that Pir Murshid Inayat Khan used very, very often to begin his lectures, and which are a powerful reminder of our real identity. Who are we, in fact? And the truth is that we are not who we think we are. We are the beloved ones of God. We are perhaps, I hope, in love with God. But the most wonderful thing is that God is in love with us. Even if we're not in love with God, God is in love with us. And it is that identity which gives us the opportunity to rise above the limitations of the way we think about ourselves. But I would like to begin also with another word, because in the last few months I've been working very intensively on the lectures which Murshid gave in America in 1926. And these are most remarkable lectures, some of the longest that Murshid ever gave, but also some of the most inspiring. It's in some ways a real culmination of his teaching during that extremely successful lecture tour around America in his last year. And although when he's addressing a group of murids, indeed, he uses those same words, very familiar, beloved ones of God. When he was addressing a more general audience, he characteristically begins his lectures by saying, friends, which I think is also very wonderful. You may know that one time Murshid suggested calling the study circle, what we would call the Gata class, the circle of friends. And I think this is a most beautiful designation. And again, an inspiration as to what is it that we are really supposed to be in our work together. So I am going to speak this morning on the subject of belief and faith, a very important subject in the teaching of Inayat Khan, and I hope that some of the things that I will mention and some of the texts from Murshid that I can present will remind you of what you already know about this subject. I think probably nothing is going to be surprising to anyone, but maybe it will help you to remember, yes, that's it. That's Murshid's way of looking at it, because I think it's very, very important in this world that we live in to find ways of expressing Murshid's teaching in a way that will really reach the world that we live in. And this is a very great challenge. But before I do that, I would like to make a couple of prefatory remarks. The first one, just a personal remark that also involves a little bit of history. Because as I was preparing to come here, I realized that this is actually the 25th anniversary, the silver anniversary of my first association with what I might call European Sufism, if I might use that, coin that term. I don't know what the right term would be, but it was exactly 25 years ago in 1982 that I first came to Europe in order, among other things, to participate in the centenary celebration of Pir Murshid Inayat Khan that took place in Suresnes in that year. But I stayed here for much longer. I had the good fortune to have a sabbatical leave from my teaching that year, and actually before coming to Suresnes, I had made my first trip to India and my first discovery of the unbelievable richness that is the heritage that we have from India. But when I got to Suresnes, well, first I met actually Sheikh al-Mashik Mahmud Mahbub Khan, who very warmly took me under his wing, and his very dear wife, Harnissa. And they so warmly greeted me and took me into, well, I would say into their family, because in fact what eventually happened is that my daughter Elodie, who's now 12 years old, is the goddaughter of Mahmoud and Harnissa. So really we belong somehow to the same family. But he took me very warmly under his wing, befriended me, despite quite a large number of opinions that I had at the time that must have been very offensive to him, but he was enough of a Sufi to overlook those and take a higher viewpoint on all of these things. And it was he who took me first into Fazl Manzil, where I had the great joy of meeting Pir Murshid Hidayat and Murshida Aziza for the first time, and they also seemed very, very happy to have an American friend, and were very warm to my family, took my daughter into their home, and this has been a very warm and continuing friendship ever since then, which has been very deeply meaningful to me in my spiritual life, for which I will always be grateful. Not too long after that, we came to Holland for the first time, and there I met Murshid Karimbash and Murshida Ratan, who also warmly took us into our home, were extremely kind to us, and have given us very, very much over the years. And also on that trip, I first met Amin Karp, I went to actually a funeral, a universal worship service that happened to be a funeral, and afterwards talked with Amin, and he invited me to come to the Anna Polona and took me then into the room where Murshid had so often lectured in there. And it was really the very first time that I had the experience, really, of Murshid's atmosphere in a room. And it was something quite overwhelming to me. Of course, since then I've had the opportunity to be in quite a few other rooms that also have that atmosphere. And in fact, in the archive where I work, Murshid used to come every afternoon and sit with his secretary, Sakina Fournay, and dictate in one of the rooms there where the atmosphere is very, very strong. But that was my very first experience of that, which is something so extremely precious to me in my spiritual life, that sense of the atmosphere of Murshid, which is the authentic expression of, his very great spiritual stature, which remains very, very precious. And of course, after that I've met, there are many people in this room that I've known for many years, and actually then in 1982 we were very, very seriously trying to bring the Sufi order and the Sufi movement together, and an effort that went on for quite a number of years after that. And in the context of that, I was made the Secretary General of the Sufi movement, an office which I held for, I think, 6 years after that. So that I feel not only a great kinship with people in the Sufi movement, but I feel very much that I am somehow a part of the Sufi movement, even though I belong to a different organization. So, and I think, we came close at one point to actually succeeding in merging the organizations, but then somehow difficulties arose and it didn't happen. But I feel every confidence that at some point in the future it will in fact happen, and I pray every day for that to occur. Secondly, before I begin speaking about belief and faith, I just wanted to make some general remarks about the state of the world and the state of the message at the present time. If one surveys the state of the world at this moment, I think one could say it's not very encouraging. In fact, I think one could say increasingly it appears to be disaster. And if one asks oneself why that is, there are many, many different possible answers. Of course, from a spiritual viewpoint, one might say from Murshid's viewpoint, one shouldn't expect very much of the world. The world, after all, is a place of illusion. We are sunk in illusion from morning till night. The whole of humanity, the whole planet is in a continual state of illusion. And Murshid characterized life today, of course speaking in his own time more than 80 years ago, as being characterized by restlessness and discontent. And I think if you take those two words, you couldn't find any better words to describe the state of our planet in general: restlessness and discontent. And all of us, no matter what viewpoint we have, are somehow affected by that. If you look in a very large perspective at the context of the Sufi message as it was given by Murshid here in the West, it can be seen as a kind of a grand exchange program that has taken place in the world in our time. That is to say, all of the great teachings of the East, all of the great spiritual teachings, and India has been quite rightly described as the graduate school of spirituality. The rest of us are, not much beyond kindergarten compared to this graduate school of spirituality throughout many, many centuries. all of that wisdom has come to the West, has come to the whole world in a form that is accessible, things that have been secret for hundreds or thousands of years, one can now purchase in any bookstore. Everything has been revealed, one might say. The secrets are all now open. And so that aspect of the exchange has made accessible all of the aspects of the higher viewpoint. On the other hand, from the West has been exported to the East, one might say, practical know-how and ability to improve the material conditions of life in a systematic way. And this, of course, is having a very dramatic effect in the East. India and China, the two largest countries in the world by far, are emerging in a most amazing way economically, making great progress in these areas, which can be seen as adopting the values and viewpoint of the West about all of these things. But what has the result been? I read recently in the newspaper, and I think for our spiritual work, what we have to have is perhaps Murshid's teachings in one hand and the newspaper in the other hand. Now, this is a radical point of view from the teachings of spirituality. I remember very well once that Sri Ramakrishna, a great teacher whom we revere in our tradition. In fact, I remember Pirvalai telling me that once his father, when he was a child, once his father gave him a picture of Sri Ramakrishna, which you can interpret as you wish, but in any case, a person for whom we have great respect, and who was in many ways a Sufi without having that name. But I remember very well the story that once he was visiting one of his householder disciples, and started to go into a room, and at the threshold of the room, he stopped, and everyone said, "Oh, what's the matter?" And he pointed over to a table. On a table in the room was sitting a newspaper, and he insisted that the newspaper had to be removed from the room before he would set foot in it. So this is a classical viewpoint of spirituality and what goes on in the world, but the Sufism taught by Murshid is quite a different approach. It's one in which we not only do not refuse the world, but we become involved in it in a very deep way, but a way in which we are in the world but not of the world. To use Jesus' phrase about it. We're not overwhelmed by these values, but we see what they are, because we have to know who it is we are addressing. We just heard a few minutes ago that Murshid spent his opening years in the West studying the psychology of the people that he was going to speak to. Even Murshid, somebody of really astounding insight into human beings on all levels, needed years of study before he could begin to speak, because he had to know the mind of the people that he was speaking to. We, of course, we think we know the minds of Westerners very well, being Westerners ourselves, but in fact there's a continual study of how are we going to reach our audience? Not that our audience is very large. How are we going to get a larger audience? How are we going to get anyone interested in these things that we know to be so deeply meaningful, so powerful, so much an answer to the problems in the world today? How can we get anyone to listen? How will anyone pay attention? And well, in the article that I saw in the newspaper, there was quoted a Chinese painter, a very talented and successful Chinese painter, who was asked, what do you see happening in China today? And he replied, there are three things we care about most in China. They are money, money, and money. He said, mournfully. He had suffered greatly under the political scrutiny years ago in China, and certainly doesn't want to go back to the old days, but like a lot of old-fashioned intellectuals in China, he's bemused by the awesome attraction of consumer capitalism. And of course, here we're talking about the largest country in the world, 1/5 of all the people in the world. And the situation is not much better in India. It's not that they don't know the values, it's that they are abandoning the values in favor of something more attractive, which is, well, as Murshid said so often, the enemies of spirituality are materialism and commercialism. And if you ask what has happened in the world in the 80-some years since Murshid's departure, you would certainly have to say that commercialism has advanced enormously. In fact, it seems that commercialism is the prime value in the world that we inhabit. Not that it is really any value to live by. It's not a moral or ethical value, but nevertheless, it is the prime, the main value that seems to dominate in the world that we inhabit. How are we going to speak to such a world? How can we address such a world? We can't address it by saying, well, you know, your values are completely wrong, and we have some better ones to offer. Nobody will listen to that. We have to find some way to go through these very limited values and suggest a step into something more meaningful. But that is very, very difficult to do. So now, to begin properly speaking on the subject of belief and faith, a very central topic in Murshid's teaching, I would like a kind of motto to my talk, which is a tala from the Gaian. Belief in God is the fuel. Love of God is the glow. And the realization of God is the flame of divine light. Perhaps I'll return and repeat that from time to time in the course of the lecture, because I think it bears repetition. In fact, I would like to see it repeated in the heart over and over and over again. And, well, in addressing you, I actually would like very much to be one of those little children, those friends of Murshid, who couldn't remember their lines in his play. I would like to be standing here, and I'd like Murshid to come right behind me here and say the lines instead. Because, you know, it's really quite astounding what the eloquence that Murshid had. Speaking as somebody who works on his lectures every day, day in and day out, I do nothing else in my life except read and study Murshid's lectures. It is breathtaking with what elegance and beauty he expressed himself in what, after all, was his fourth or fifth language, very far from his native language. But somehow his inspiration was such that he was able to do it. And I wish to, as much as possible, use Murshid's own words in conveying this subject to you. So first of all, we may ask, what is the Sufi attitude toward belief? Particularly, what is the Sufi attitude toward the beliefs of others? Because, as you know very well, not everyone believes what we believe. Not all of us believe the same things. each and every person has a personal belief system based on many things, although we might have a broad agreement, but the things that we broadly agree to are certainly not agreed to by the world in general. So what is our attitude? What is the Sufi attitude toward the beliefs of others? Murshid expressed this very clearly when someone asked him the question, does the Sufi philosophy in its essence believe in reincarnation? You may know, if you're familiar with Murshid's teaching career, that he was over and over again asked questions about reincarnation. It was a subject that, the people in general, and particularly the class of people who were interested in Murshid's teachings, were crazy for this idea due to the influence of theosophy, which was very widespread at that time. And of course, reincarnation was one of the main subjects taught by theosophy and was quite fascinating to everyone. So Murshid did not actually like the topic at all. He would have preferred never to speak about it, and he pointed out that, in fact, teachers in India virtually never talk about it, but nevertheless he got asked questions over and over again. And in fact, I remember, I think maybe the closest that Murshid ever came to being really annoyed. He was not a person who got annoyed. I can't explain that. Maybe some of you have risen above ever getting annoyed, I don't know, but I certainly am far from it. But Murshid really seems to have never gotten annoyed by anything that happened. He had his viewpoint was such that he could assimilate any experience and see the value of it, and therefore it was precious, no matter how unfortunate or undesirable it might seem from some other point of view. But the closest he ever came, I think, was when someone asked him a question about reincarnation, and he said, well, this is the same question that the questioner asked last year, and the answer is still the same. But on this occasion, since Murshid's way of dealing with things was to use them for the best possible purpose, so instead of saying anything at all about reincarnation in response to the question I just quoted, he said instead, the philosophy of the Sufis does not give any belief and does not oppose against any belief. Now this is something very, very hard to achieve, as you might imagine. It's very difficult to resist the impulse to give a belief in connection with Sufism. Very, very difficult. It requires a self-restraint. Not only that, it requires a profound philosophical belief that it is the wrong thing to do for oneself. But I must tell you that after I've been involved now in this path for 37 years. As you heard, I was a professor of comparative religion. I travel a lot around the world and give talks and seminars. Many people, I meet many people, and most of them have never heard of Sufism, I must tell you. You might think Sufism is well known in the world now. Not at all. Most people, if you say Sufism, they have no idea what it is. They look rather puzzled and they say, what's that? And if in your explanation you happen to mention anything at all about Islam, you can see the people immediately turning away, saying, well, I'm no longer interested in the subject, I don't care what you say. So you have to be very, very careful to respond. But people say, I tell them a little bit about what I do, and they say, well, I say I work on the teachings of Piro Murshid Inayat Khan, a great musician from India who came to the West and was a spiritual teacher. And then they say, well, what did he teach? And then what can I say? Because anything I tell them of what he taught will just be a belief. Handing them a belief for them to say, oh yes, or oh no, whatever the reaction is. Whereas it is simply not the Sufi way. And of course, it's also very difficult not to oppose against any belief, because we see that there are some beliefs, religious beliefs, that have very undesirable consequences in the world in which we live today. Violence of various kinds seems to be motivated by religious belief. And how can one not oppose that? Of course, one can oppose the violence without opposing the belief, but sometimes the two seem so closely connected that it's hard to see how to sort them out. Well, what does the philosophy of the Sufis do? What it does is that it interprets to its best ability every belief as favorably as the followers of this belief. Anything that anyone believes, for a Sufi, you interpret it as favorably as the people who hold that belief. You must not only be able to look at things from their viewpoint, but also to accept the value of what it is that is believed. And he means this very seriously. For instance, a person asks a question about Buddhism to a Sufi, about Brahman, the Christian religion. The Sufi stands for this person as the lawyer would stand in the tribunal to give his argument before the law. So we must be like someone hired to use our best resources to defend this belief before any challenge. That far must go to appreciate the belief of another, even though it is not our belief. Well, exactly like a lawyer, right? We hired professionals to represent that point of view, whether we agree with it or not. This is our job to do that. This is a Sufi philosophy. But what a Sufi also does, to become a Sufi, it's not necessary to have this belief or that belief, this doctrine or that doctrine. There's no requirement of any particular belief. But what a Sufi helps is for the person to rise above and look at things from a higher point of view. So having adopted and defended that belief, then there can be this suggestion to see it from a higher perspective. And that is the subtle influence which a Sufi can, under the best circumstances, have in interactions with the belief of another. A Sufi wants first to go to the central idea, and when he stands there, he sees the truth of all things, because the mystery of life is that when the divine lantern is taken in the hand, then, wherever you take the lantern, all things become clear to you. Therefore, Sufism gives freedom to every member to believe for himself and to find out things for himself. That is to say, it really is a science of belief, because the method is actually the scientific method. You do not begin with any assumptions. You take the belief and you see how it plays out in an experiment. It's all an experiment, and you see what the results of it are. You have no preconceived ideas. You don't have to believe this or that. You want to find out the truth. And the belief is the occasion for the experimentation that leads or can lead to a realization of the truth. But it has to be through your own experience, directly through your own experience. Murshid once wrote in a letter to Kismet Stam my teaching is no particular teaching. In other words, I teach what cannot very well be put into words. As Pir Murshid Hidayat has told us only a short time ago, it is in silence that the truth is known. Besides, my way is not to urge, but to bring before humanity what is good and beautiful, and let them choose for themselves what they will. Which shows the great respect of human freedom, which is one of the central ideas of the Sufi message. In fact, I've been thinking very much lately about in what way the Sufi message can be brought to a larger public. And I think what is necessary is to become very clear on a number of subjects without making doctrines, certainly not dogmas, but not even doctrines. Even the word teaching, perhaps Murshid once indicated, is too strong a word to use. He himself used the word 10 Sufi thoughts in making a list, but and that was, I think, his attempt to make a formulation of what are the basic teachings. But unfortunately, somehow those 10 Sufi thoughts have just not caught on. And the form in which they were put by his very helpful assistants and is one that just somehow doesn't speak to what humanity is able to hear at this moment. So I think we need to work on making a new list. Maybe it's 10, I don't know. I think maybe Murshid chose the 10 Sufi thoughts because of the 10 commandments or something like that. I'm not sure where the number 10 came from. His original formulation was 7 Sufi teachings, and then it was expanded to 10. But we need to come up with a set of teachings that can be explained clearly, and we need to do the work ourselves of working through all that Murshid teaches, clarifying it and putting it in a form that can be heard. I think this is a kind of project that we should all participate in together. I was thinking myself of suggesting a list here, but then I thought, no, that's the wrong method. Then people will have to have arguments about whether my 10 are the best or whether some other 10 are the right ones. It won't be the right way. So we need to find some way of working together to come up with what we regard as the basic and most important teachings and putting them in a form that is intelligible and communicable to the world in which we live. So I'm proposing this project, and I'm perhaps here exemplifying in the subject of belief and faith, one of those where I think what Murshid has to say is of the greatest importance for the world that we live in. So, we begin with the belief in God, which you remember is the fuel, Murshid says, the belief in God. And Murshid says, if one once believes that God is the Father, a term used very much in Christian tradition, our Father who art in heaven. If one once believes that God is the Father, that teaches us that every child has the heritage of the Father. And this is not only a philosophy, it is a religion and a moral viewpoint, because by trusting in the divine beauty in every person, that heritage from the Father, trusting in the divine beauty in every person, we at the same time develop that beauty in ourselves automatically, Murshid says, because we have that belief. If we really can trust in the divine fatherhood of each and every person, that is the method for developing that sense within ourselves. That is how we become whom we may be. So it is a weakness
to turn our backs to anyone who might seem lacking in that beauty which we expect. I'm quoting from Murshid. It is a weakness to turn our back on anyone who might seem to lack that beauty which we expect. It is the opening of the heart to every soul, whatever be the state of evolution. It is that alone which will inspire the heart with that beauty, and by opening that beauty, one will find it coming to life. So, this is a fundamental method for our own personal development in the realization of what it means to believe in God. Because, of course, there are levels and levels of that belief. There are levels and levels of what we think we mean by God, and there are levels and levels of the degree of trust that we can give to what we conceive as God. However, when the belief in God is taken in complete sincerity, Murshid says that belief becomes like the egg of the phoenix out of which that magic bird is born. The egg of the phoenix out of which that magic bird is born. It is the birth of God, which is the birth of the soul. So the soul becomes living in the being by that process. But the believing is a process, and by this process, the God within is awakened and made living. And of course, as I'm sure you know, Murshid says again and again that the entire point of all spiritual training is to learn to hear the voice of God within. Once a person can hear that voice, nothing else is necessary. But, every day we pray, open our hearts that we may hear thy voice, which constantly cometh from within. And yet, most of the time in our daily lives, maybe we might hear a little whisper of that voice in a great distance, or we might hear nothing at all. But it's there. It's a seed that is planted and which can grow and grow depending on our ability to direct our attention in that way, which is the whole point of concentration and meditation. All of the training that we do is all to give us the ability to focus our attention on that which is truly important. And as I'm sure you're very aware, Murshid says that meditation really must become continual. It's not something that we do once a day. It's something that we do all the time. It seems impossible, but he says it is not. He says it's very difficult for the first year. In the second year, it becomes a little easier. And then in the third year, it becomes a part of one's own nature. But this is, for most of us, I think, a very great challenge. Not something quite so easy. Perhaps it was easier for Murshid than it is for us. But nevertheless, this is where we are aiming. This is the goal. This is where we are heading. So, now, I wanted to mainly speak to you from a sermon that Murshid gave in the Universal Worship on this very subject of belief. And this was given in New York in January of 1926. And it was a most remarkable occasion because Murshid had been in New York in 1923 and had given a number of lectures there. You can read those in the volume of the Complete Works, 1923-1. And when he returned in 1926, things were much better organized in New York. His followers had been doing a lot of work during that time, and his lectures were very well attended. In 1923, his universal worship had been attended by 50 people, which was more than were usually there when he did a universal worship. In 1926, the universal worship was attended by 500 people. They had to move it to a larger hall because there was such a large number of people. And Murshid found this extremely encouraging. It was after that that he made his famous remark that in New York City alone there could be 50 universal worships in 1 week. He thought, well, this is taking off in a most remarkable way, and this is precisely the sermon that he gave on that occasion, on the subject of belief. This is what he felt it was important to communicate to what may have been the largest audience that he ever addressed. I'm not going to read the entire sermon to you. It's actually quite long, but I do want to talk about the 4 stages of belief, which he discusses here. It's something he discussed in a number of other places, but here is perhaps the most powerful discussion of it. So, the 4 stages of belief. The first one is the belief of the follower. Elsewhere, actually, in the way of illumination, technical terms are given for each one of these stages. Whether it was Murshid's intention to attach these words, or whether this was something that, in working on preparing the book, which was done by Dr. Gruner, he asked Murshid for these technical terms. But in any case, this first stage of belief is called Iman Muhmil, which means Iman, faith, belief, Muhmil, without foundation. This is the first one, and this is the general belief that people have. It's a belief which is held because everyone thinks this. And it's not only in the religious area that we have these beliefs. It's a cultural thing. Everyone believes certain things, and we go along and believe it. The great majority of people go along and believe it because that's just the way we've chosen to live as human beings. We don't go against the general beliefs of people. And this is, Murshid says, the belief of sheep. If a person stands in the middle of the street and looks up at something, soon there will be 10 people standing there looking up at that, and then before you know it, 100, and then if they stand there long enough, eventually 1,000 will all be looking up just because one person is there looking up. And you've seen that happen. It does in fact happen. And in giving examples of this, Murshid cites his experience of being in Russia and seeing in the store window of every store paintings of the Tsar and the Tsarina, who were held in awe by everyone in the entire country. And then a short time later, they were all thrown away, discarded, and there was nothing left. It's a belief without foundation. It's a general belief. Everyone believes it, but it's based on nothing, and it can go away. It has no firmness to it, and yet this is the most common kind of belief that one finds in the world. The second stage of belief, which is called Iman Kamil, a completed or perfected belief, is one which is based on authority. And this is, in fact, what one finds among serious religious people for the most part in the world. There are 2 authorities. One can be the book, the scriptures. And that can be very, very powerful. In fact, is the case for most people throughout the world, that they have a sacred book that they refer to, and they consider that all truth is embodied in this book. They need only look there. In fact, I remember very well in the past that in every American home, there's the family Bible, probably in every Dutch home as well. And people had the habit, when they got into some trouble of some kind in life, they would go to the Bible, open it up, and put their finger down, and there was the answer, miraculously, to whatever happened. And, well, I think some of us may do the same thing with the Gaian. I'm not sure. I certainly have at some times said, oh my gosh, I'm in so much trouble, what am I going to do? And opened the Gaian, and miraculously, there was the answer. It's quite a wonderful phenomenon. In fact, it goes even beyond that. I have to tell you that having worked on many, many lectures of Murshid, there is the astonishing coincidence that every single lecture that I work on, somehow, at the time that I'm working on it, it contains a personal message for me at that moment. Applies directly to my life. Now, how can this possibly happen? But it does. It happens to me over and over again. So, there is the authority, but then, of course, there's the question. Is my understanding, is my interpretation of these scriptures correct? And generally one depends on a person to say that, a priest, a minister, a rabbi, an imam, whatever, to say this is the way that it's supposed to be understood. But are they right? Very, very often, speaking as a professor, I would say their interpretations are really quite far-fetched of what it actually says in the scripture, but one believes it absolutely anyway. But there's another aspect to the second stage. It's not belief in an authority. It's not only in a scripture, but it can be in a person. And that, Murshid says, is much more profound, because the relationship of a person with a book, it cannot be a personal relationship, but the relation of a person to a person, that is something much more meaningful to a human being, because what we are is personal. Above all, we are personal as human beings. And so to have a savior, to have a teacher, to have someone to whom one looks as an authority, this is a very profound, and this is why the word kamil can apply to this aspect of belief. And I would say probably, if I'm not mistaken, I'm criticizing absolutely no one in saying this. I speak for myself, but I think it probably is true for many other people, that we are mostly at this stage with regard to Murshid. That is to say, we regard him as an authority, and we look to his teachings to tell us how to think about things, which is a very wonderful form of belief, but it is not the most advanced form of belief. There is much beyond that. And the important point here is, as Murshid says over and over again, that belief is like a ladder. If there is one thing that I would like to learn how to communicate to the world in general, to particularly to the religious people in the world, it is that belief is like a ladder. Wherever you are, you're standing on a rung of that ladder. It's wonderful that you've gotten that far. Maybe you're only on the first rung, but at least you've started. You're going somewhere. Maybe you're on the fifth, maybe you're on the eighth rung, but wherever you are on that ladder, there's farther to go. Whatever belief you have, there is a higher belief that you can go on to. That belief is evolutionary in its nature. It must go from one thing to a higher thing. Otherwise, you are just stuck. Even no matter which rung of the ladder you're on, the point is not to be on a ladder. The point is to get to wherever you're going on that ladder, and that's after the top. So, if you're staying on any rung of the ladder and not going forward, then you are, in fact, stuck. You are not progressing in your belief. And Murshid goes so far as to describe this at one point as being nailed to that rung. And this is where most of the believers in the world are exactly there. They think they have their belief, they understand what that belief is, and nothing should change that. And in that way, they limit themselves. They cannot progress as long as they think of things in that way. So this I think, is the essence of what Murshid has to communicate to the world in which we find ourselves with regard to belief, that it must always progress. So, then, the third stage, I was going to tell you, there's a wonderful story that maybe you all know, I'll just refer to it, of the man who, the Chela, whose guru recommended a particular book to him which he read, and in this book he said you must reverence everything in life, meet everything as God. And then he was walking along a road, and someone came running and said, "Oh, there's a mad elephant coming, get out of the way, get out of the way." But the man said, "No, it said in the book you must reverence everything in life." So instead of running out of the way, he bowed down before the mad elephant, who proceeded and knocked him off the road and practically killed him. And sometime later, his guru came to see him in the hospital, and he said, "Well, what happened, my son?" And he said, "Well, I was reverencing the elephant, and it knocked me off the road and practically killed me." And his guru said, "Well, didn't anyone tell you to get out of the way?" And he said, oh yes, there was a man who told me to get out of the way, but I was thinking about how I have to pay reverence to everything in life, so I didn't listen to him." And he said, "Well, that's funny that you would pay reverence to the mad elephant, but you didn't pay reverence to the man who told you to get out of the way." And this is very often how our belief seems to function in our lives. It keeps us from getting out of the way rather than providing us with the practical advice that we might need in the moment. The third phase is, Murshid calls it the belief of reasoning. That is to say, here it is no longer because an authority has said it, but it's because you have thought it through, thought it out yourself, and made it your own belief. And this Murshid refers to as haq-ul-iman, the truth of faith, or true faith, shall we say, which you might think would be the ultimate faith, but it is not. However, this is a faith, as I said, based on the scientific method, something that you have tested, you have thought it through yourself, you've made it your own belief, and you don't need an authority to say that it is true, because you know yourself that it is true. And this is a much more firm and much more valuable belief. Murshid presents this as a solution to something that he encountered very often traveling in the West, he says, as people who were brought up with no particular belief. As indeed I was myself. My parents were not religious. They didn't teach me anything about religion. Well, my mother was a lapsed Christian Scientist. So whenever I was very curious about religious things when I was a child. I have no idea where it came from. It was just natural, I guess. And I would ask these questions, and my mother would say, "God is life, truth, and love." That's the Christian Science formula, Mary Baker Eddy. God is life, truth, and love. And that was a pretty good foundation to begin with. She wouldn't say anything more about it. That was the whole teaching. God is life, truth, and love. But that's not so far away from love, harmony, and beauty, is it? Many people he encountered who were brought up without any belief, and some of us, in fact, may be deciding that we don't want to restrict our children, put them in a narrow way of thinking, withheld really giving them any religious teaching. But Murshid says this is a great mistake. He says it's like if you were 30 years old and you suddenly decided you wanted to learn to play the violin. A very nice idea, but you'll never do it. So you have to start when you're 5 years old, he said, and then after 12 steady years, you will become musical. But if you start at 30, it's too late. And it's the same with belief. Maybe the belief that is given is not the grandest possible belief, the widest possible belief, but it is a foundation on which you can build. And that is necessary. Because if you're going to evolve, you have to evolve from somewhere. You can't evolve from nowhere. Nothing will come of nothing, as King Lear puts it so well. So that this form of belief is a much surer one, but it has the problem that it is based on reasoning. And reasoning, of course, the mind, Murshid respects it very highly. Some spiritual teachers tell you that your mind is your enemy, but Murshid does not say this at all. He regards it as a wonderful divine gift that we have this intelligence and this ability to think things through, but nevertheless it is limited because it is in fact a servant of something deeper in the being. The mind is the surface of the heart. Deeper in the heart are the feelings, and even beyond the feelings is something that Murshid refers to often as the bottom of the heart, which is, one might say, the contact point between the soul and the rest of our being. And it is from there and that our deepest impulses come. And our reasoning will go along with whatever the deeper parts of us regard as important. They will support whatever opinion we decide to adopt. And so not entirely reliable. But then there is the fourth stage of belief, which is properly called Iman. He calls it Ainul Iman, that is to say, real faith, or Ain actually means eyesight. So I don't know how to put it in English. Eyesight belief, that is to say, seen belief, a belief which comes through our own eyes, so to speak. And this is what may really be called faith, Murshid says, worthy of the name Iman, which he points out is actually a very, very difficult word to interpret. He says this word Iman is difficult to translate. It is not exactly faith, belief. The nearest word one can find for it is conviction, a conviction that cannot be changed by anything, a conviction which does not come from the outside. So this is a faith which comes from that connection with the very deepest level of our being, where it discovers its own identity in this conviction. Actually, there are two words that are used sometimes. There's the word yakin, which is usually translated as certainty, and that would seem to be what Murshid is talking about here, but he discusses the two. Yakin, he says, is a settled belief, one that has become so strong that it cannot be challenged, but it doesn't have the same depth of Iman. Yakin develops into Iman. Certainty develops into conviction. When you say it is so, that means belief. When you say it cannot be otherwise, that means faith. When you say, I wonder, it is imagination. So, this is something which goes so far into the depths of our being that it becomes unshakable. It is simply a fundamental a part of us that nothing can challenge. Now, I would say sometimes this comes about, it's not always that one has to go through a process of evolution to arrive at such a belief. Sometimes it is just a part of one's being and one discovers it. However, on other occasions, it can be the suggestion of another person that catapults us from the second stage of belief into the fourth stage of belief. I remember myself that this happened to me once. I'd been a Murid for quite a number of years. I was extremely assiduous about my practices at that time. Of course, I began each day with the purification breaths without fail, believing that they were of very great benefit to me. But then I met with a man named Shamsher Beorsa, some of you may have known, extremely remarkable Norwegian man who spent his last years in America, amazing man. And I was interviewing him about Murshid. I got to travel around and meet a lot of people who had known Murshid and interview them, which was a great inspiration to me in my own life. And he told me, he said, well, you know, I went for 15 years without ever once having a cold. And then one morning, somehow I got up and there was something distracting that happened and I forgot to do the purification breaths. And that very day, I got the first cold that I'd had in 15 years. And his telling me that took me from the level of kind of trust in Murshid, which was the reason that I did these practices. Murshid gave this practice, so I should do this practice, and I'm sure it will benefit me, to the state of conviction. I have no doubt whatsoever of the immense benefit that comes to me from doing this practice every day now. I mean, it wouldn't even occur to me to ever think of forgetting to do this practice. It's become so much a part of my conviction about what it is that inspires me and helps me in my life. So, the belief which has become Iman cannot be changed when it has culminated into conviction. Where does it come from? This belief comes from the divine element in man, known as love, as intelligence. It is known as two different aspects. In reality, these two things are one in essence. If there is no intelligence, there is no love. If there is no love, there is no intelligence. Love springs from intelligence, and intelligence lives in love. So, I've tried to explore here a little bit some of the aspects of this great subject of belief and faith, and particularly to focus on that faith which is the bedrock of our spiritual life, the point at which we must somehow or other, by a process of evolution, arise if we are going to be able to speak from the depths of our heart with absolute conviction of the truth of the message that it has been our privilege to be able to be involved in delivering to this very, very needy world, a world in which the most important values have been forgotten, and there is a kind of a mania for things of very little importance. You may remember a poem of W.B. Yeats in which he says he's talking, of course, about the First World War, but it could apply more generally to our time. The best lack all conviction. The worst are full of passionate intensity. Well, that's a very sad state for the world. The best, whoever they are, need to have that passionate intensity if they're going to confront the enthusiasm of the values which are causing so much trouble in the world in which we find ourselves today. So I would like to go back and remind you of the motto with which I began. Belief in God is the fuel, love of God is the glow, and the realization of God is the flame of divine light. And then just one more quotation from Murshid's teaching. The chording vibration sounds in the innermost being of man and can only be heard in the silence. When man can go into the inner chamber and shut the door to every sound that comes from the life without, then will the voice of God speak to his soul, and he will know the keynote of his life. So thank you very much for your wonderful attention. God bless you, and I believe we may have some time if you wish to ask any questions. Thank you very much.
Again, shown how rich the Sufi message is by taking one theme with which we all think we are somewhat familiar. And you have taken from all these lectures so many treasures, so many jewels, which again surprise and inspire us. It is very interesting. We will contemplate on it, I hope, for some time. I hope somehow we get your text also,
yes,
so that we can read it again. And I think it is a great opportunity that we still have a little time for questions.
Yes.
So who of you would like to use that time and ask a question?
How would you describe the difference between a conviction that cannot be changed and being nailed when a belief doesn't change anymore?
Well, the person who is nailed to a rung of the ladder might very well imagine within himself that he has a conviction, and that's why it cannot change. And the way I would characterize the difference is by the broadness of the viewpoint that is represented by that belief. Because a true belief, which is a part of Iman, Ainul Iman, the highest state of realization, is one which is very, very large and encompassing, always, by definition. Because Murshid says every step forward on the spiritual path is an enlargement of our being. We must, that's how you can tell if you're going forward or backward. If you're getting smaller, you're not going forward. I mean, in viewpoint, not in stature. But if you see things more broadly, if you become more tolerant and accepting of everything, and this is, I think, why Murshid was able, as far as I can tell, never to be annoyed, because he saw everything in the very, very large context. As indeed whatever we might imagine to be the view of God, of all of reality, must be. So large, containing so many contradictions, but just able to take everything. So the difference would be in the limitation of the viewpoint. People often have extremely narrow and limited viewpoints that they're sure are exactly right. So that is a kind of imitation of conviction. But they will find, in fact, that within their own selves, at some point, that belief will no longer satisfy them. You remember the wonderful saying of Murshid, there are sayings of Murshid that I return to over and over and over again in my life that are so deeply meaningful. And Murshid himself said, "How did I rise above narrowness? My own walls began to hurt my elbows." Okay. So, if you have one of those narrow beliefs and you're disguising that as conviction, you'll find after a while your elbows will start hurting, and you'll realize that you have to take the nail out and make another step, or you're not going to get anywhere. Now, I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer to your question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting and inspiring. And I should like to hear from you what we can do just from ourselves to the world. The world's in great trouble, and we can't be happy with ourselves because our beliefs are so good for us. We have to go in the world,
yes.
And to be concrete, how could you as a Sufi talk to someone who tries to convince you that the jihad is not something to fight in yourself, but to fight all the others you don't like?
Yes. Yes. Well, I wish that I had an opportunity to speak with more jihadis than I do, because most of them don't have the slightest interest in discussing the subject with me. They only have an interest in following the instructions that they have received from someone for whom they have respect, whether it was earned or not. And this is precisely the problem. But I think what we can do, the way in which those who have decided to follow a path of violence in the name of religion, the way that they communicate with each other, as you probably know, is on the internet. And so I would say, if we wanted to have an outreach in some way, we have to find some way of expressing ourselves on that same internet, where our website is just as accessible as their website, and where, in fact, the arguments that we present are extremely knowledgeable, because that's necessary. We can't seem to be just some sort of vaguely idealistic people who think everyone should love everyone else. We have to present very specific arguments. So we have to educate ourselves about those traditions. We have to know what we're talking about, and then we have to present convincing arguments. And then we have the possibility of reaching someone. Otherwise, we have such a compartmentalized world, and it's still, that the followers of one religion, although many people are feeling their elbows hurting and would like to rise to something larger, nevertheless, it happens generally that the authorities in religious traditions are extremely nervous about losing their people and want to, put them into the narrowest possible, and they're the ones whose voices are heard because they're already respected. So I'd say it's hard work from an intellectual viewpoint to become well-informed, to use our intellectual gifts in this way. Secondly, we must become technically proficient so that we can, in fact, present things in a way that people will find interesting and worth looking at. And third, we must follow the example of Murshid, who says, "My smallest work on the inner plane is greater than all I do in the outer world." And considering how very much he did in the outer world, that's quite a claim to make. That, in other words, it must be in our prayer life that we promote the possibility of this message being heard. We must make this our continual concentration, day and night, to open the way to this communication. But nevertheless, despite all of those things, it will require a great deal of faith to be able to undertake it at all, because it's all too easy to say, oh, well, what can I do? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. That's inspiring. And I was also thinking, while you were telling about this way of not disputing, but trying to come in the other's thought, that there was, I think, an American woman who interviewed the terrorists who were in prison, and she really found out that they were very keen on telling their story, and so I think that's with the persons in question a very Sufi way almost, like you told, to first look at what their motivation is.
Yes, a truly deep, genuine interest in those beings, no matter how bad we think they are, because Murshid specifically says that. Those in whom we cannot see the divine light, it's because we can't see it. It's not because it's not there. So we have to work on ourselves to be able to find it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. It's very inspiring. And the question that arises in my mind, though, is how does one deal with people coming from certain scientific backgrounds who would say that religion is the problem?
Oh, yes.
Because of the violence that it's...
Well, as you know, quite a number of very popular books have been published recently by extremely intelligent people who have marshaled all of their intellectual resources to attack God and religion and to see it as the source of everything that's wrong in the world. And how can we respond to this kind of attack? Actually, Murshid himself more or less says that religion is responsible for most of the things that are wrong in the world. He doesn't disagree with them. So in the first place, one can begin by warmly agreeing, yes, that religion has been the source of many, many horrible things in the course of history. But one can perhaps suggest that there might be a more balanced view in which one can also see the great benefit that there has been from religion, and I don't see people writing those books somehow. At least they're not on the bestseller list. If somebody has been writing them, they have a very limited audience. But I think there are those who are capable of doing so and could write equally popular books that would say not deny the evil that has been perpetrated in the name of religion, but to see that there is another side to it also, and to suggest that in fact the way in which God and religion are characterized in those attacks is itself a kind of caricature, that in fact the God who is being attacked there is not the God in which most religious people believe. That in fact the object of people's faith is a being much greater than the one who is being denied in these attacks. And it's such a helpful teaching in this regard. Murshid's viewpoint about God, where he says that we say that God is much better than the best human being. And yet we often attribute things to God that we would not attribute to even a good human being. So that the limitation is from the limitation of the human point of view. And if we saw things from a larger perspective, and in fact many people are moving in that direction and are already taking steps in that direction, we can create together a conception of God that is far more beneficial. Because Murshid emphasizes the creative element in our thinking about God. It's not that God is a given, it's that we think about God in a certain way based on our whole personal history. And in the evolutionary nature of belief, we can create together a much more beautiful conception of God that we can then embrace, and which will no longer be the excuse for human beings to do harm to each other.
There's one person who has been writing about this way about religion, and that is Karen Armstrong.
Oh yes,
which I can advise very strongly. In
Yeah.
this case, books of her books, and some of them have, or more. Most have been translated in Dutch too. So.
Oh yes, yes. Well, she's a wonderful writer, a former nun who decided to do something quite a lot larger, rose above the narrowness of her own background, and has made a marvelous contribution in writing which is very accessible, not technical or academic, but very soundly based. And I too recommend very highly her books, which begin to show us a way to find an intellectual expression which takes into account the whole of history, but finds a lot of her suggestions are very, very helpful in the process that I'm talking about. So I would also warmly recommend her writings.
Well, I think the time for luncheon is approaching, so we should conclude this discussion. We could continue for quite a long time.
Yes, yes. Indeed.
Perhaps in the context of interesting books, I could mention Professor Laszlo,
Yes.
who has given excellent books in which he works out the most modern views of science, showing that it really comes together with the mystical view. I think that could be very important for the future also.
Indeed.
It is a matter how God is seen, how the God ideal evolves.
Yes.
That is the problem.
Yes.
And I thought in your talk that this idea of the 4 stages of belief goes together very much with the different steps on the ladder of the God ideal.
Yes.
It's also the ladder.
Yes, yes.
And it goes together.
Quite
isn't
so.
it?
Quite so. Yes.
But let me then thank you very much indeed for a wonderful lecture, stimulating answers. You have shown us all the richness of the Sufi message, how we all should go more and more deeply into it to climb on that ladder.
Yes.
Because the higher we come, the more able we will be to spread these thoughts of Sufism that the world needs so much. I think there are also encouraging signs that more and more people in some way or other are looking for spirituality.
Indeed.
And what is Sufism but spirituality? But they don't realize that, but it will come. So let us end this morning on a note of hope.